Just as a quick note before we get started with this story, if you haven't already listened to Sonbol Part 1, The Breach, from last week's episode, please do go back and catch the first part of this story. That is episode 34.1. If you have already listened to the first part of this tale, wonderful. Let's get started, shall we? Sonbol, an original multi-part story by Jared I. McGee. Part 2, Persenche. Rather quickly, McCarthy, Fitzgerald, Flowers, and I came to fully realize just how closely we four would be working together. Essentially, at Academy Prime, the quads were divided by assignments. Now, we had an inkling this was so, but hearing it from the Commandant's lips directly nailed that home for all four of us, for everyone that had gathered in the mess for orientation, really. The Commandant herself lived with 3 other commanding officers that served with her, creating a super quad that would go into battle just like the rest of us 3 years down the road when the smock entered our solar system, just outside of Mars being the current launching point for our growing fleet. My first day at Prime was, in all honesty, a bit blasé to start. We had meetings galore. We took tours galore. We split up according to specialties to have more in-depth looks at what we'd be doing for the global defense effort and how, precisely, we'd go about our assignments in the months and years before any action would be seen. But it was all theoretical. Classroom work. The awkward meeting with my 3 others that made up Primrose 33, the name, of course, coming from the name of our hall and our room number, real original, right? Had occurred at roughly 0800, quite literally directly after my arrival transfer took me from the airport in Dublin to the academy. The rest of these meetings and tours and other perfunctory day 1 type doings ran until 1800. 10 straight hours of this is the laundry room and don't do that thing we beat trained into you at your regional facility. In short, it was 10 hours of redundancy and repetition. On top of that, I didn't see my bunkmates and partners throughout all of it, all quads being split in favor of some other groupings. 1800 saw us eating some pretty nice food in the mess. Nice might be a bit of a stretch to most of the others at Prime, but I honestly thought it was some of the better food I'd had in some time. Regional facilities didn't have bad food, but they certainly didn't have sloppy joes with real beef. To me, our victuals were beyond reproach, but that might be the poor kid from Tennessee talking and not the up-and-coming would-be leader of a space-age mission against a probable alien armada. That disadvantaged Tennessean boy lurched when I turned down my picky tablemate's offer to finish their sandwiches. But this current Tennessean man that wanted to be the best of the best knew damn well that 4 more half-sloppy joes on top of my entire plate would not help him in becoming a leader in physical testing here at the academy. I had to change along with the rest of the world, even in these small ways, all because of these smock. There really wasn't an aspect of life that those buggers hadn't touched with that proclamation of theirs. I had often found myself wondering if they somehow got off on the knowledge that they'd so skewed the course of our planet and the lives of its inhabitants. Those thoughts would creep in more and more often now that I was stationed in Dublin. The academy made this all far more real after all. Mess had begun at 1800, and mess promptly ended at 1900 with some harsh-sounding guttural instructions from one of the sergeants, and all diners scattering in all directions, half running to whatever had been listed as their next set of meetings on their wrist communicators, or RITCOMs, as we world military types lovingly referred to them. We were tasked with calling them this back at regionals. In truth, they were fancy smartwatches that had a couple extra features and no need for a secondary device. We'd come a long way with technology over the past 50 years, but we weren't so advanced as to be unrecognizable from a century before us. That would be the stuff of bad fiction. I let the hundreds of others rapidly disperse while I took an extra moment to check my communicator. Now, we were getting to the good stuff. There, right there on my wrist in a green-tinged off-white font read, Corps-Specific Training. One of the cool features of the RITCOMs is that you can hard press down on a word or term or place or whatever and get more information about it. The feature was nothing new to any user of technology, but it still amazed me every time, as it meant I never had to feel utterly lost with all the new jargon that was springing up in the short time since the advent of the Global Confederation. I long pressed on Core, and the display flicked to a new set of text saying, Core, most basic unit of Global Confederation Defense Forces companies. For adhesion and cohesion, Core units share living assignments and mission orders from Global Command. Core groupings hold a minimum of 4 and a maximum of 8. Corps come together under commanding officers to form companies, battalions, and other larger units. Synonym for Corps, Quad. This unofficial term springs from the groupings of 4. Even Corps units of 8 are split into 2 for living arrangements for logistical purposes. Need more information? Press here. I decided that was more than enough information to let me know that I was correct about both how our living situation here at Prime had shaken out, and that after a pretty tedious day, we would be getting to do some initial training in our quads after all. I was stoked about this, since this would be the first time we'd mock up how we'd be serving and fighting together in our new mini-families. However, Flowers' scalding looks and refusal to look away from me as I changed made me think I had some bridge building to do there, particularly if we four wanted to have the kind of cohesion necessary to trust someone or a group of someones with your life. My meeting was to be held at the Camelopard, which was actually a building called Regent's Hall, but it was so spotted and modeled that it had become known by the archaic name for a giraffe. The nickname was clever, I thought. From reading my prep packet, I avoided the usual surprise that newly arrived trainees had when seeing how beat up and relatively old some of Prime's buildings were. In short, when you have to have academies like this spring up worldwide almost overnight, you have to take some pretty major shortcuts, using whatever buildings and materials are available to you. Our dear Camelopard was some old factory building that had been around for only God knows how long. It had been requisitioned immediately following the Accords. Not that too much convincing to turn it over for a decent price needed to be done, I'm sure. This building was another 10 years from crumbling into true disuse and actual legal condemnation, and that's being generous. For the GC, though, it was just another building in which to hold just another set of training courses. As I entered, the musty smell of mold and sheer oldness and disrepair struck me in the face, and I thanked the good Lord that our living quarters in Primrose were among those newer buildings that did pop up overnight after the Accords. What I assume what used to be a factory floor was open and sprawling, so it took me a little bit to wind through the tables and desks and other classroom-style furniture in an attempt to find my 3 assigned corps mates. After about 5 minutes of wandering, I saw McCarthy waving and beaming at me from another 15 feet away. Right up front. Nice. I was more of a second-row kid myself, close enough to let my instructors know that I'm serious about learning, but still not in suck-up central of row 1. But this would certainly do for me on our first little introductory day lesson, whatever it was. Prime was quite famous, or maybe for tossing its cadets into odd situations right off the bat. So I can't say that I wasn't surprised by all this traditional classroom setup mess. Everyone was sitting in little chairs and desks, scrawl pads out and ready to take notes. My surprise began to edge closer to anxiety as I took my seat, McCarthy and Fitzgerald greeting me warmly, Flowers giving me the barest of nods. Anxiousness was cropping up because, if I knew the GC and its way of doing things, this was all some sort of posturing to get us calm and in one mindset, while the real training was going to be something quite different indeed. I put my head on the swivel, trying to determine what could possibly be set to come at us from the expanses of this very open room. Hiding too terribly much would be difficult. Rather quickly, my crew realized my unease, and began inquiring as to why I was so on edge and for what reason I was now scanning the room with my newly acquired military situation analysis eyes, if you will. My steely focus must have been a bit disconcerting in this environment. I explained my thoughts on the matter briefly. You know, he's right, ladies. This does seem a bit soft and squishy for core training session at Prime. Ears up and open, aye? Fitzgerald tossed out to the table. Aye. McCarthy replied immediately. Flowers simply looked from her to him to me, not nodding or uttering so much as an mm-hmm. Apparently, I'd made a pretty terrible first impression having snickered at her name back at the bunks. I pushed forward anyway. Okay, I'm glad most of us are on the same page here. Training should have already started. The dais is empty. We are on the edge of having a late start. You all know that damn well does not happen. Ever. Not with the GC in general, and definitely not here at Prime. I'm not seeing any overt threats or anything coming our way. Does anyone else? 2 heads shaking no, and 1 calm face with stone eyes. Alright then, let's sit on the edge of our seats and be ready to roll with whatever they inevitably throw at us. As long as we try to jail, we'll be able to dominate this. That's what they want after all. You see, what they're gonna do... My words were cut off with the loud chink of metal on metal. Massive blast doors slid down over the expansive entrance to the hall, and what few windows in the room were sealed by some sort of metal sheeting. My heart began to pound. This was a bad start. They didn't want us to get out. An alarm began to sound. Rather than panic or chaos breaking out as it would if this were to happen in a regular place on a regular day, crisp silence among the trainees hit immediately. No one said a word. Now everyone was on the same page and waiting, the alarm blaring in the background. But we, from Primrose 33, had already discussed our best course of action, vague as it might have been. So we were a couple steps ahead of the rest of the room when thick, gelatinous ooze began spraying down from the rafters. The stuff was thick and viscous, reminding me of the cane syrup my granddad used to make back in Arkansas and that we used to enjoy on our biscuits. That sweet treat was delectable, but it was a pain in the ass to get off plates, and God forbid if you spilled it on anything. Like that deep brown cane, this all but opaque black goop was thicker than thick. Molasses on a cold day is a cliche, but rather than using it for a time metaphor, that's the perfect stand-in for whatever the hell it was they were cascading down upon we newly arrived trainees. The thickness was problem enough. Rather quickly, it became apparent what the real challenge being proffered the entire group was.
This room will be completely full of fluid in 9 minutes, if my eyeballing dimensions is correct.
Flowers stated flatly.
I know that's what you 3 are wondering. I know that's part of my expertise, so there you have it. Let's move.
I shook off the heartbeat of surprise of having Flowers leap back into being a functioning part of the group, and we 4 began to piece together a rapid-fire plan. As that planning began, though, another chest-vibrating plink, plink, plink was felt more than heard over the slathering waterfall of goo, and the torrent doubled in intensity.
Make that 5 minutes,
Flowers said with a slight uptick of her mouth. She seemed to be enjoying this. Plink, plink, plink. The flow increased again. 5 minutes to 2.5. Plink, plink, plink. The flow increased again. 2.5 to a little over 60 seconds. Plink, plink, plink. We 4 each took a lungful of air and prepared to fight for our lives, together, as a unit, for the very first time. Thank you for listening to the second part of Sonbol, titled Persenche. This portion of the story has numerous backing tracks behind it coming from freesound.org. The first ambient track comes from user cabled_mess and is being used under a CC0 1.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication license. The second bit of music and the alarm sounds come from the same soundscape uploaded by user Drakenson and is being used under Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial 3.0 Unported license. The final track comes from user iSpeakWaves and is being used under Creative Commons Attribution 3.0 Unported license. Thank you to these artists and freesound.org for making these works available for artists like me to further elevate their own work. Next week, keep an eye open for part 3 of Sonbol, titled Circumjacent. But for now, that does it for prose this week. I certainly hope that you've enjoyed the tales, and I look forward to sharing more fun fictional frolics with you next week. The episodes will be coming to you from Oxford University in the UK, and will, therefore, not be coming in live. So my apologies in advance if something goes awry. If there is a blip with these episodes, rest assured that I will do my best to correct said blip ASAP amid my edifying adventures. Until then, go out and live a few new epic stories of your own.